Hello, I'm Michael, and in today's video I want to talk about composition in landscape photography. And I'm recording this video here in Brittany at the beautiful coastline, currently here at a beautiful fort which I tried to photograph this morning. Fortunately there were no clouds, so there's no portfolio photo, but yeah, for the video it's still fine. So as I said, I want to talk about composition, and throughout the next 2 weeks when I photograph different seascapes here in Brittany, what I'll do for each of those, I'll give you one or a couple of tips about composition, and we'll start right away here at this scene. The tip I want to give you is about middle ground. So especially if you're photographing with a wide angle lens like I do, temptation is always to get very close to the ground, very close to your foreground, which is perfectly fine because it distorts the foreground, it creates or emphasizes the shapes there. This can look very dramatic. And I really like to do this to draw the viewer into the frame. But you also have to be careful that you don't sacrifice your middle ground. For example, here, for this scene, I have a nice repetition. So I have rocks in the foreground, I have water, then I have rocks in the middle ground, again some water, and then the background. So if I were to go too low with my camera, I would sacrifice this separation. So those rocks in the middle ground, at some point they would merge with the cliffs in the background. So I would lose this repetition, the interest there, and also some depth in the frame. So this is something you always have to look out for. When you compose your shots, take care of your foreground, but also then have a close look at the middle ground and see if you can find some shapes which repeat itself. So what you have in the foreground, then again in the middle ground, then ideally also in the background. So this repetition is something to look out for, and for this you should also pay close attention to your middle ground. So that's the first tip. Now I think I'm gonna pack up, head back, get some sleep, and yeah, let's see what other seascapes I find, and then I have a few more tips for you. So for tip number 2, I've come to another seascape, and this tip is more about foreground now. And it's about how to balance the sky with the proper foreground. For example, this evening I'm lucky to have still a few clouds in the sky. I hope they stick around for after sunset, because then they could light up nicely. But anyways, if you have clouds in the sky, think about what foreground you could use to mimic those patterns. For example, if you have a clear sky, I've talked about this in previous videos, I'm usually looking for also a very clean foreground, because if I have a very chaotic foreground, there's no balance if I just have a clear sky. If I have clouds in the sky, then I can also use a foreground which has some textures, some structures which might mimic those patterns in the clouds. Now, for this evening, I have a very simple solution to mimic what's in the sky, because as you can see, I have beautiful reflections which are left by the receding tide, and yeah, I can just use those, so get very close to the foreground. Also, I found here some rocks in the sand which break up this composition a bit, so it's not just a reflection shot. I also have some additional interest, but that's really the easiest way to create some balance in your shots, to use a reflection. But aside from reflections, there are many other ways to do that. You can use rocks, smaller rocks, bigger rocks, structures in those rocks. Look for shapes that mimic what you see in the sky. And that's also important when you do the scouting. You don't yet know what sky you'll get. Look for different foregrounds, so you'll be ready when you are at the location, want to photograph it, and then you get presented different kinds of skies. You know which foreground you can use. Okay, that's tip number 2. Hopefully I now get some nice light and can take a proper photo, and then we'll be off to another seascape for the next tip. So the next tip is about using layers in your compositions, and I'm doing exactly that this morning. So you see here I have the long lens on, and I'm zoomed into this scene here of you see the lighthouse very far in the background. It's the Cap Frehel lighthouse, and I have many layers to work with here. So I have sand in the foreground, then a river, then again sand, some dunes, sand, water, hills and the horizon. And what those layers do, they lead me step by step into the frame and to the lighthouse in the background. So it's a very nice scene, especially with a long lens. It looks fantastic. I already photographed it during blue hour, and there to emphasize this sense of depth and also the layers throughout the frame, I had a nice color contrast. So the water was very blue, then we had a warm sky, and also the sand was reflecting that warm sky a bit. So I have warm colors, cool colors, warmer colors. So this worked very nice. So if you're looking for compositions, always also look for layers or how you can layer your shots. It also helps if those layers connect at kind of a bit of an angle, so you don't need very strong diagonals if you do this, but it helps if there are a few diagonals or angles in your frame, because then you can create some zigzag motion for the viewer throughout the frame, and this helps. Okay, so that's it for this tip. Now we're gonna move to the next location and see what other tips I have for you. So another morning here in Brittany, and I have another tip for you. This one is maybe one of the most obvious ones, and you've certainly heard it, but it's still important, so I'll include it here. And it's about leading lines. So when you choose your compositions, try to include leading lines to lead the viewer through your scene, and it works very well if those leading lines are diagonals or at an angle. So get your camera a little lower to achieve this if necessary. For example, what I've done here, I have those rocks here in the foreground, and there's the transition to the sand. So if I go lower, this creates a nice curving leading line even, and that's the next tip. So don't just look for diagonals. If you find curves or lines that curve into the scene, that's even better. So it's something to look out for. And what I have here, it's not only leading lines at the bottom of the frame, I also have those rocks there at the top, and the wide angle lens distorts those. So I also have leading lines coming in from the top right and then on the other side also. So I have many lines pointing into this scene and then through this canyon of rocks to the background where I have some more rocks. And that's something you certainly should look out for when you compose your shots. And really, sometimes it's just fine-tuning your composition a touch, moving your camera a bit over to the right, to the left, up, down. So this is really something you can achieve very well with a wide angle lens, but also with longer lenses you sometimes find those. They will not be as pronounced as with a wide angle lens, but you can still try to get a little angle to the lines in your frame to make the compositions more dynamic. Okay, so about this morning, not that spectacular light, but it's certainly a composition I might come back to the next days. Actually, I think sunset might even be better because sun's going down there. So hopefully I'll retake this photo with some better light and show it to you. So I'm still in Brittany here at another beautiful scene with those beautiful rocks, and I want to use this or the photo I'm taking this morning to talk about the rule of thirds, which I often use to get a good starting point for my photos. So when I compose photos like this one, for example, where I have a very dominant subject on one side and then in the background I have a similar rock which also a subject, so those kind of balance each other, and then I might have other elements in the frame which are important. I try to balance them out. So I think of those subjects to have visual weight. For example, that's a big rock with good contrast to the sky. Then there's another rock. So those subjects have visual weight. Then very contrasty areas have visual weight. Also, if you have very saturated areas with bright, energetic colors, those have visual weight. And what I try to do is I think of my photo to have some scales in the middle, and I put visual weight on one side. I try to balance it by putting some visual weight on the other side. So getting a balanced composition, and the rule of thirds can help me with that. So give me a good starting point. It doesn't mean that I always stick to it or abide by this rule. So once I have composed my shot, starting with the rule of thirds by using the grid on the back of my camera, I then just go by my eyes. So what looks pleasing to me, what looks balanced. So I move the camera around a bit, see what happens if I move it up, down, left, right. Sometimes in the end, it's really what I get by the rule of thirds, which looks most pleasing, most balanced, but sometimes it's completely different. So I might have elements in the center of the frame, and I might have the horizon very far up or very far down, so not at the third line, but even farther out. And it's just what looks good to me or what looks good to you. Go by that. So know when to break the rule, and that's simply when you get something that looks better by moving your camera around in a different way. But those rules, also the other rules that there are, can give you a good starting point. And that's, in this case, what worked for me. I even stick by this rule, so I keep this one on the third line and the one on the back, and I think it looks very pleasing. I'll now show you the photo. I even had some clouds maybe 45 minutes ago. I left the camera in place now for that time just to capture foreground detail, blend it together, and now show you the photo. And then we're off to another location and maybe another tip about composition. So as you can see, we're no longer at the coast, we've come to the mountains, and I want to give you an additional tip for compositions. This tip is about placement of your main subject, or not the placement, but really about giving your main subject some room, some space. So this morning I came up here to this mountain to photograph the mountain you see there on the left. So the composition you now see, it's not the final composition with which I took the photo. I had to revise it a bit to be able to film myself. Anyways, this mountain was my main subject. It's sticking out there, out of the landscape, just beautiful, spectacular, and ever since I learned about it, I wanted to photograph it. To make sure I can properly show it in the frame, I had to make sure to give it room, so not just to the sides and beneath it, also at the top. So what I wanted to avoid here was for this mountain, for my main subject, to kind of merge with the horizon. So now you can see the horizon is quite a bit higher than the mountain, so I have some space there, and also to the sides and to the bottom, everywhere there's space around the mountain, so it's nicely isolated. And for this I had to climb another mountain, so get high enough to be able to look a bit down on the mountain. So you don't always have to climb a mountain to achieve this. So for other subjects, sometimes it's just enough to move your camera a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, go a little more down or up. That's actually, going down is another way to do it. So for example, for such a mountain, what I could also have done, gotten very low and having the mountain loom in front of me, so just with sky and maybe clouds around it. This would also be a nice way to isolate it, but I chose to look down on it. And for other subjects that's similar. Always try to give your subject some room. Don't have other things, other parts of your photo intrude into the space of the subject, partly hiding it, or have the subject merge with the horizon or some other elements. So try to be very detailed when composing your photo to avoid such things. Okay, that's it with this tip. It's getting windy up here, so I think I'm gonna get down now, have a breakfast, and see you with the next tip, which might not be from France. So this trip's already at an end. I likely have to continue this video somewhere else or make a part 2 of it. But for now, I really have to get down. I'm very hungry.